Anti-oil protesters turn thugs. I'm Brian Lilly with the Rebel.media. It was supposed to be a gathering of facts, a hearing from all sides. The National Energy Board doing a series of hearings across the country on TransCanada's proposed Energy East pipeline. The pipeline that would create jobs across the country, that would take Alberta oil all the way to New Brunswick. It would allow people in Eastern Canada not only to export the oil, but also to use the oil, replace the Saudi oil, the Nigerian oil, the Venezuelan oil that is currently being used to fill up cars in much of Eastern Canada. But for protesters who are anti-oil, none of that matters to them. They just want to shut down the Canadian oil industry. And so they showed up to protest at the Montreal hearings of the National Energy Board. These are contentious hearings already. Politicians like Montreal Mayor Denis Coderre have been whipping up anti-oil industry sentiment across the province, even though polls have shown the majority of Quebecers support the idea of a pipeline bringing Canadian oil from west to east. But he doesn't want any of it. He wants the pipeline rejected out of hand. And so he was there to give his testimony. But even having anti-oil, anti-pipeline people registered to speak, that was too much for the anti-oil protesters. They broke into the meeting and shut it down. They unfurled a banner saying only communities can give permission, and then they started shouting down those in attendance. Police actually arrested 3 people, a 29-year-old woman and 2 men aged 35 and 44. They have been released at this point, but they were arrested. They had to be dragged out. Now, here's an interesting point. While these anti-oil protesters turn to the thuggish tactics that we expect from them, the tactics that they use when they can't win through democratic means, there was something interesting going on outside. We've often told you about unions that are funding these anti-oil groups. Unifor does it. The United Steelworkers protest the pipelines, even though pipelines are made from steel. But outside of the center, outside of the convention center where these meetings were being held, was a group of union members that were protesting, but they were protesting for the pipeline. At one point, they stood between the meeting on the inside and the union-backed CSN-repped anti-oil protesters on the outside. They're members of the UA. This is the union association that represents plumbers, pipe fitters, and other trades that would benefit from this. And they say, let the pipeline go through. That's a bright spot. But the downside is most of their union brothers and sisters are funding organizations like Rabble that continue to whip up propaganda against the oil industry. They continue to fund organizations that want the oil to stay in the ground. Even Unifor, one of the unions that represents probably the largest section of oil sands workers, is against all the pipelines. It's a bizarre situation. But I have to say, watching those UN members stand outside saying, let the pipeline through, is a bright spot on an otherwise dreary day in Montreal.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.